Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the chair of the New York section. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. This evening is our traditional NAB Wrap-Up program, and it's something we've been doing for many years now. It's become a tradition, as you will see. I always begin by thanking our sponsors. We are up to, I believe, about 47 sponsors, maybe 48 sponsors, who provide the funding that allows us to operate this section for the year. They support the annual holiday party that has been another institution, all of these meetings, etc. But in particular, the studio at B&H is our sustaining sponsor, many times the gift of any other sponsor, and they really make this all possible. So please treat them accordingly. Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about membership on a subsequent part of this presentation. But I would like to just review the recent results of our election. We have an election for new Board of Managers members each year, and we just completed one. As you know, the Board of Managers operates this section. It's the day-to-day business of running these meetings and choosing the topics and producing and finding venues and organizing the catering and all of the details of these meetings, including the annual holiday party, et cetera, et cetera. So the Board of Managers is a very active group, about a dozen people. Some of them are currently elected, some are cycling in and out of elected status because there are term limits. So first I want to thank those people. Without them, I certainly could not do this. It's a really dedicated, hardworking group, probably the most dedicated, most hardworking group SMPTE-New York has ever had, and the section's been around a long time. So thank you. So once again, I am your chair for this next season, 2019 to 2020, and again, John Cerconi will be the secretary-treasurer. New managers are John Gallagher of the Borough of Manhattan Community College, Carl Cavagnolo of Ross Video, and Ed DeLauder of Adorama. If you would all stand and say hello, introduce yourselves. Carl, Ed, thank you. For the Connecticut subsection, Brian Kobolars once again is chair, assisted by Wes Simpson as co-chair from Telecom Product Consulting. And the Long Island section, newly headed by Bill Hendler of VNova, with the assistance of past chair Ray Blumenthal of Media Products. So I don't think any of those people are here right now, so thank you to them. And we're thanking our outgoing managers at this time, Mike Strine from ABC, and Rose Lockwood, who is an outgoing board member, as is Tom Morrow, but they are now both our governors, and they're both here this evening, so thank you. Actually, I've seen Rose here. I don't think I've seen Tom yet. Is Tom here? Tom didn't make it, but Rose is here. Rose, if you would stand and introduce yourself. She's still outside. She's really dedicated, still taking tickets, right? Okay, and Jenna Rappel-Noyes, who's also outgoing. So thank you to them. Obviously, they stay involved with the Board of Managers after their elected term ends, and then they run again as soon as they can. So thank you to them. Okay, we have an upcoming meeting, June 6th. The subject will be SMPTE 2110 and NMOS. The producer is Wes Simpson. It will once again be held at the AT&T facility downtown, and we have two wonderful speakers, Carl Paulson of Diversified and John Bertoni of Dell EMC. We will have a demo system actually up and running as a SMPTE 2110 architecture at this meeting, so it'll be very interesting. Another great meeting, and that'll be our final meeting for the year. Okay. And once again, in June, we choose our topics for the coming year. So if you send me an email with the subject line 2019 topics, feel free to suggest any topics you would like to see us address next year, okay? So technical topics, good new ideas, new subjects. It's open to anyone who wants to make a suggestion, but please do it in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. All right, and before I come to the next section, I first want to recognize some VIPs and dignitaries are here with us tonight. We have Robert Seidel of CBS, the past president of SMPTE Worldwide. Thank you. We have, as I mentioned, Rose Lockwood, our section governor. I would like to recognize Mark Foreman, who is a long-standing member of our board and who produces this slideshow that is running on the wall to my left and has done that for this particular meeting after NAB for 10 years now. So this is his slideshow. It will continue to run. Give it your divided attention. Okay. I would also thank, we're now streaming our meetings, so I just want to thank Nick LeBourne of ABC and Derek Drazen of ABC, and of course Eric Hirschberger, who's been very helpful in general. So the ABC crew has really been helpful to us at this meeting, and especially for the venue. This is a great venue. We really appreciate being here, so thank you to WABC-TV in particular. All righty, I now have the very special pleasure of introducing the Executive Director of SMPTE Worldwide, Ms. Barbara Lang, who's going to talk to us about membership in SMPTE and the importance of all being members. Barbara? Thank you.
Well, I'm really super excited to be here. Thank you, Jeff. What a great venue. I'm always geeked out by being on a studio set, and I watch it on television, and I can't believe it all works, and everything that you all do makes it work, so it's really very exciting to be here. I was thinking back the last time I've been to a New York section meeting, and I must admit it's been a little while, and it was probably the last maybe 2 years ago for the NAB show review. I always enjoy coming to this, mostly because when I go to NAB, I never get around to seeing much because we're very busy at the SMPTE booth talking to members, talking to prospects, and things like that. So I'm really excited to be here tonight so I can learn what I missed in Las Vegas. So, and I know it's going to be a wonderful topic. You know, that's what SMPTE is all about. It's bringing people together for things like this to help the industry understand all that goes on in the technology space. And you all know, I'm sure, that we care about 3 main activities in what we do, that is membership and coming together in meetings like this to network and learn. Education, of course, is a major component of what SMPTE does so that we can teach the industry about these technologies and help share the knowledge. And then, of course, many people know us for the standards work that we do, and we're very excited about the new work that we're doing, 2110 being a topic that's coming up, obviously a super hot topic, and I suspect it'll be mentioned today as well from what's been discussed at NAB. So, show of hands, who here is a member? Awesome. Maybe the other way is better. Who here is not a member? Okay, well, so the first thing you're going to do when you leave here is go online and join up. I think it's an important part for anyone's career to be part of this community, and obviously there are many benefits, networking and the journal and getting access to people and content among them. So I don't want to take up too much more time. I know you came here to hear about what went on at NAB. Thank you so much for the New York section and what you do, Jeff and the managers. And am I handing it over to?
Actually, I left one thank you out.
Okay. Okay.
And just to close, we have a number of students here this evening who are helping us out from City Tech. In fact, we had a student section meeting at City Tech in Brooklyn last week. It was a great meeting. We had presentations from a cinematographer, a member of the Atsc, and from a lens manufacturer. It was really a terrific meeting, and these are some of the students who were there, and these are our upcoming members. These are the student sections that are affiliated with the New York section. I implore you to engage with them, talk to them about your careers, talk to them about their future careers. Let's take care of our student section members. Okay? So thank you.
Thank you. And another perfect reason to be involved with SMPTE. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to
John Gallagher from the Borough of Manhattan Community College and this evening's producer.
Here you go. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Barbara.
Well, I'd like to start by recognizing Joe LaGrasso, who actually donated some equipment to City Tech last year. And I think, Joe, you have no idea how important that is to CUNY, that we have someone supporting us. I'd like to introduce our first speaker by saying something that's kind of embarrassing. In New York, we're not supposed to get excited when celebrities show up. Like, we're supposed to be cold and jaded. Like, you know, like when they show up, it's like, don't ask for autographs, don't get selfies. So about 5 years ago, I'm on the train with my children, on the A train going downtown. And someone gets on the subway and I get all excited. And the kids are like, Daddy, who got on the train? Is it somebody important? I said, wow, it's one of the most important people in the film industry. They were like, Tom Cruise? I went, no, Mark Cuban. My kids had no idea what I was talking about. And you were wearing very interesting pants. I just have to say that. But every day. But the thing about Mark is that he's probably the only person here who ever had an apartment that was actually an FCC test site. And he's probably the most knowledgeable. I mean, if we had a Yoda in the New York section, that would probably be close. But Yoda doesn't know half the crap Mark knows. So Mark's our first speaker. So I hope that's a good introduction. Good.
I'm what Kelly Ripa looks like before makeup. Okay, my decided theme for NAB this year was magical realism. The theme that NAB chose was storytelling, that every story starts here. And I have this slide just to tell you that I love a lot of things because I'm going to say some stuff and people are going to say, oh, Mark hates HDTV or Mark hates VR, zoom lenses, whatever. Here's an example of the magic and the reality. Here's another example of the magic and the reality. Not quite sure what that thing on the left is, some sort of camera mounting unicorn. And the reality was Blackmagic, which did not introduce anything earth-shattering this year, but introduced improvements to everything in their line, as they do every year. Attendance this year, it's down significantly, especially from 2017. I have the unaudited figures on the left there, and even the number of companies exhibiting is down significantly, and even from last year. The magic part is, well, if it's down, we don't want it to be that down, so we'll use the unaudited figure for 2019 and the audited figure for 2018 in the press release. And we'll throw in this line that so many people self-identified as buyers. There were more people who self-identified as buyers. How many people here were at NAB? Did anyone ask you to self-identify as a buyer? I didn't think so. This was from Pro Video Coalition, random thoughts on my saddest NAB ever. And part of that article references that tweet on the upper left. Boy, I remember the old days when Apple Red and DJI used to exhibit. Facebook, however, had a very large exhibit. I think the main purpose of it was so that you could stand in front of the wall and make a thumbs up sign. The show opened with Gordon Smith, the president of NAB, doing the keynote, and part of his keynote was this sentence: the next-gen TV attachment with this phone lets me watch my favorite stations anywhere I am. Wow. And he also said that Apple is refusing to add broadcast chips to its products. Well, I showed you this slide last year, differences between ATSC 1.0 and ATSC 3.0, and the next to the last line there, oops, that was interesting. No? Okay, that's it. So next to the last line, it's in red now. For ATSC 1.0, the government mandated reception in TVs. For ATSC 3.0, there is no mandate. And the TV set manufacturers have not putting in receivers because there isn't any content to receive. So one of the exciting things about ATSC 3.0 at NAB was two coalitions of broadcasters coming together and saying, by the end of 2020, we'll have ATSC 3.0 in 40 markets. How much ATSC 3.0, we don't know. What quality ATSC 3.0, we don't know. But there will at least be something, so there may be TV sets. So back to that sentence in the keynote, he says, this attachment lets me watch my favorite stations anywhere I am. Well, did it let him watch Washington TV stations in Las Vegas? No, there are plenty of devices that will do that, but a next-gen receiver is not one. He also said, this next-gen TV attachment allows me to watch my favorite stations anywhere I am. So we've made it back to 1962 technology. Here was something in TV technology that NAB announces the successful ATSC 3.0 transmission of Nielsen's audience measurement technology. And then the article goes on to talk about how the audience measurement technology is actually something in the audio signal. So you should all be very pleased to know that ATSC 3.0 can carry audio. Now, we're already trying to cram multiple stations into single ATSC 3.0 channels, but here's ETRI of Korea, and they are bonding multiple ATSC 3.0 channels now so that they can get enough bandwidth to do 8K. 8K is supposed to look better than HD, and maybe under some conditions it does. This was a 3D display showing how bad pictures could get at the show. There was very little 3D or augmented reality or mixed reality or virtual reality at the show. This is an RCA TK45 tube television camera, and it was producing some of the best pictures I saw at the show. Here is Andy Citos. Some of you may remember him from WNET or Warner Amex or MTV Networks. He's wearing his special glasses because he wants to make sure he does get all the resolution that is available. And what does he see coming after 4K and 8K? Special K. Here's the chair of the UHD Alliance. The UHD Alliance, UHD stands for Ultra High Definition, supposedly is there to promote ultra high definition, but here he's saying, well, you know, UHD doesn't really necessarily mean ultra high definition. It could mean high dynamic range or something. And by the way, high dynamic range gives you an awful lot more than ultra high definition. So there's also interactions. These have appeared in the SMPTE journal. This is one of the student papers from Rochester Institute of Technology. I love going to their student paper sessions and seeing what they have. So here they're talking about judder sensitivity in cinema exhibition when you go to HDR. So 24 frames per second may not be enough if you're doing HDR. Speaking of cinema screens, here is something in the Hollywood Reporter, NAB trends that mattered this year, and one is the spotlight dims on LED cinema screens. Direct view cinema screens was going to be a big thing. There was at least one at the show, Sony's, and I'll show you that in a moment. But why is the light dimming on it? Well, here is Sony's LED cinema screen. It's absolutely fantastic. You can see it on the right there, and you see an illuminated sign talking about Sony. So that's when the screen is bright. Here's when the screen is dark. No, that's not a picture that you're seeing on there. That's reflection of things in the Sony booth. and you can see the Sony sign reflected in the screen. So if you have an exit light in the movie theater, you get a big reflection on the screen when things are dark. Something that may be able to be worked out, but at the moment it's still a problem. More of the RIT student papers, an investigation of the value of wide color gamut. We all say, wow, wide color gamut, absolutely fantastic. Well, what's it actually worth? What do viewers actually care? That's something they're looking into. Here's another one, determining a consumer preference for motion blur, whether people actually want to see blurry pictures rather than sharp pictures in motion. The Immersive Digital Experience Alliance was yet another alliance that was at NAB, and people are saying there's an urge to immersion, or an urge to immerse. Here is more ATSC 3.0 news. The US is proposing ATSC 3.0 as a digital standard, an international broadcast standard, an international digital broadcast standard. Woohoo! But so were NTSC-M, so was Brazil's PAL-M. It's not a big deal to be an international standard. You just propose it, they rubber stamp it, and you're an international standard. Doesn't mean anybody's going to use it. SMPTE standards, that's different. And here we have one last thing on ATSC 3.0, riding the road. This is so while you're driving, you can watch things in HD or 8K or something like that. But speaking of cars, here's a story of a gamer who got accustomed to driving a race car while gaming, and he actually had a real race in a real race car and beat a real race car driver. So e-games is significant, and so there was quite a bit on esports and e-games at NAB. And here's a story, the impact of multiplayer games on entertainment and cinema. 3 billion people are watching esports of some sort. That's half the population of the Earth, basically. So it's a significant platform, and it is eating into entertainment. But what else is eating into entertainment? Is esports the only thing that's eating into Netflix audiences? Well, no. Here's something that Netflix tweeted in the middle of Super Bowl. They said their streaming is down 32% versus the Super Bowl. So broadcast is still pretty strong in some areas. And streaming can also have some problems. Here's a YouTube thing. Whoops, we couldn't deliver what you wanted. Here is BBC iPlayer. Oh, sorry, that didn't work either. Here is Amazon Prime. Whoops, drew fire for the live stuff. So live streaming of sports, still an issue, not quite taken care of yet. And according to Microsoft, the digital divide is much wider than we think. The FCC said, oh, everybody has access to broadband. And Microsoft said, no, it's only about 2% of people. The FCC has since revised down considerably. They haven't gotten down as low as Microsoft yet, but they have changed their mind. Now, here's another thing about the Super Bowl. This is latency up to the receiver, not even counting receiver latency. You can see it goes up to about 45 seconds or something like that, a little bit more than 45 seconds. Who cares? You know, the Super Bowl starts at 1 or it starts at 1:00:45, who cares? Well, sports betting is now legal. And so bettors care. And Wall Street has been going wireless in a bid for ultra-low latency. The same kind of thing is going to happen with streaming. So here we have Aeronsoft, and they say they have ultra-low latency encoders. Their definition of ultra-low latency, by the way, is under a second. But here is Limelight Networks, and they're demonstrating this impressive thing where we're looking at signals going from Las Vegas to Los Angeles and Paris and coming back. And at first glance, it looks like those two pictures are the same, but if you look at the guy second from the right, you can see his head has turned. You can see some other differences in the pictures. So geographic distance is going to affect latency. The cloud, well, now we can have reliable injection to the cloud. Isn't that nice? The most reliable source that people have been thinking of in the past was Zixi, and here's a wall of logos of all the people using Zixi stuff, and it is quite reliable. But they're now getting some competition from the Secure Reliable Transport Open Source Alliance, and there were a few signs around the show of SRT, not as many as for Zixi yet. The Zixi people say, yes, we know SRT is doing this stuff, but we think we're better. Dante is another alliance, and that was all over the show. I don't think there was an audio company at NAB that didn't have the Dante spoken here. And I like the sign saying, now with AES 67. There's Dante's wall of people who are using the Dante system. Some other alliances, there was SMPTE ST2110, of course, but Nutek's NDI still had a few people. The origami ecosystem for hardware associated with IP video, you probably don't recognize most of those companies. And here is a truck from the mobile TV group, and you can see down at the bottom left there, introducing end-to-end native IP mobile unit. And I have nothing bad to say about this truck. It's an excellent truck. But I'm going to show you some historical stuff. This is a pre-electric telephone office. And if you look at the left side of the picture, the left side of the desk, there are 4 acoustic speaking tubes. That's what people used before telephones. They would pick the thing up, hold it to their mouth, and say, hey, what is happening here? So that's roughly turn of the 19th to 20th century. Here is an older thing. This is an image from a book published in 1673, and it's describing an acoustic intercom in the 4th century BCE. So that's all ancient history, except this is 21st century US Navy photograph. And notice that the guy is speaking into a speaking tube. He's also wearing a headset with a microphone near his lips. He is also holding a microphone in his hand, but he is speaking into the speaking tube. Well, why is that? Because on a Navy boat, it's mission critical. And if the electrical system goes down, you need some other way to communicate. So now we go back to that truck that I have nothing bad to say about because I asked them very tough questions. It's an end-to-end native IP truck, and it is. But it's got patch panels, even though IP doesn't use patch panels. The switcher has broadband inputs, meaning non-IP inputs. There's an analog audio mixer available. So if all else fails, the show stays on the air. You lose some capability, but you stay on the air, and that's very important, which is why I love that truck. But you have to know 2110 is different from existing stuff. You can't patch around a problem, at least not physically. You can do it virtually. Film at the show, still going strong, quite a bit of film stuff. Notice that film chain is a 10K film chain. This was at Sony. They're using artificial intelligence to extract handwriting. I'm not quite sure what the significant application for that one is. But here's a better application of AI. This was at NAB. They said that the worst attacks of security problems have been credential hacks for credentials for streaming services. And so Cinemedia is offering an AI solution to eliminate password sharing and maybe start attacking that problem. Velosa had another one. This relates to the New Zealand mosque shooting. And they say they can very quickly identify when guns are involved and get things taken down before thousands of sites start publishing them. So 2 very good uses of AI, I think. 5G, a confusing mess. Testing 5G speeds, they're not necessarily any faster than 4G. Your battery life may vary down to 0. Maybe your 5G isn't even 5G, it's just 4G. We don't yet know what the frequencies are that are going to be used, and so on. But here is the head of our FCC speaking at the White House, and he's talking about how important 5G is, and one of the reasons it's important is telemedicine. Okay, I have a pain. what does 5G have to do with telemedicine? The doctor is going to operate on you from his car that's moving through a 5G zone. And lest we think that 5G is the end, here we're starting to focus on 6G. We hear a lot about cord cutting, but in fact, the vast majority of users of cable and satellite are staying on cable and satellite. And the last figure I saw, I think this week, was 86 million households in the United States are still connected to cable or satellite. Now, this Westminster Dog Show thing doesn't seem to have anything to do with NAB, but I'm just pointing out that the Westminster Dog Show has one Best in Show. This is NAB. They had a new award this year, the Product of the Year. There were 120 Products of the Year, sometimes 20 of them in the same category. And TV Technology gave out 67 Best of Show, at least 67. That was the number of images in their gallery. This looks like a good product. It's a cable cam for a lightweight camera. There's something like a GoPro down on the bottom of that. And let's see if I can get the video to start here. Whoops, nope, let's go back to that. Can you start the video on this one, Eric? Yeah, looks like a good idea, except it's doing that. Here's a tradition at NAB. Every year, Canon says we're coming out with the greatest zoom range lens, and every year, by the time NAB rolls around, Fujinon ups them a little bit. So Canon had a 122 by 8.2. Fujinon came up with a 125 by 8. This is the Ikegami UHD 430, and it had an interesting feature that I didn't notice anyplace else in the show floor: portrait extraction. So this is a 4K camera, meaning that within the middle of the picture, instead of having the 16:9 landscape, you can extract a 9 by 16 HD. And why would you care to do that? Well, it's because more screens are now vertical than horizontal. So that's the Columbus Circle subway station on the left. That's Broadway and 73rd Street or so in the middle. And on the right is a new TV from Samsung called the Cero, which you can use either in 16:9 or 9:16 mode. Satellites are starting to combine with fiber. And so we'll just provide you a service, and if it's good enough for us to do it on satellite, fine. If not, we'll deliver it on fiber. Getting to real products, fabrics, excellent audio-video delay analysis built into their handheld stuff now. Sarnoff used to be famous for coming up with test signals that did not need an analyzer, and then people said, well, can't you make an analyzer? And so they did, and one of the things I like about this analyzer is it not only tells you what the signal is now, but what somebody might have done to it at some point in the past. So was it ever scaled to 1280? Was it ever scaled to 960? And the analyzer will show you that. Here's a new term for you, FLAPE. This is what IBM is offering, flash plus tape. So the tape gives you archival, the flash gives you instant access. Tracking was a very big theme at NAB this year, and this is one of my favorites from this company, Sear Vision. And I'm going to run a little bit of video now, and this is real time. They're picking up the knees and ankles and other nodal points of people just walking around the show floor. And they picked up some stuff on my head, which will combine them out. There I am, going across the bottom. And this is a company that uses tracking stuff for some of its stuff, Rushworks. Their new product this year is called vNews, basically a news studio in a box. It starts at $16,000. It ends at about $26,000. You can have up to 4 cameras, graphics, switcher, pan, tilt, zoom, lighting. It's all in the box. And this is my pick of the show. This is the Azulpix camera. It's about the size of my fist. Whoops. And it's got an 8K image sensor in it, and the lens shoots 360 degrees in one direction and 270 degrees in another direction, and it's got processing that will extract 9 or even more images from that if you want, each of them an HD image, and you can pan, tilt, zoom, Dutch the images if you want to. You can control gain, black, gamma, anything you would normally control with a camera control unit. Not cheap for a point of view camera, but awfully cheap for what it can do. And this was my favorite moving image technology at the show. That's actual water coming down with little valves so you can put pictures into the water as it falls. And this is a lie. Normally the PDF is available by the time I speak, but I was having some computer issues, so I'll try to get that out tonight. And thank you very much.
We're really fortunate today because we actually have a visitor from Atlanta, Bob Baker, who's the Senior Media Transport Architect of Warner Media. We can't call it Turner anymore, but it's really an honor to have you here, sir, and I hope you can come up and talk. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is awesome. So I think this was my 26th year at NAB. I usually walk about 24 miles, and I try to see everything. So right off the bat, I'm going to show you, I grabbed this off the web. You know, Mark already talked about the number of people and stuff. I thought it was interesting that 160 countries represented and potentially $20.5 billion of revenue. Pretty cool. So some of the things that start off the bat, kind of technology stuff, and some of the stuff might be a repeat of Mark, but cloud was definitely big. A lot of cloud. It's, you know, are you getting it to the cloud? Are you receiving it? What are the ingress costs, the egress costs, all that stuff. And so, you know, you found it to be kind of a catchphrase. There were some companies, little tiny company, and they're like, you know, oh yeah, by the way, we can send to the cloud. So that was interesting, and definitely Zixi and SRT and stuff was definitely a transport for that. Security, that's gotten really big, of course, in the industry. I don't know if you guys heard the story, but they told it at SVG where they were at an NFL game and they were walking through the truck compound, and on the side of the truck where the tech manager puts all the paperwork for the crew and everything was the SSID and the password for the Wi-Fi for the truck. And so that's something they're trying to crack down on. 5G, of course, Mark already talked about that. I'll skip that. SMPTE-2110, of course, was everywhere, all over the place. RIST, of course, is really big with VSF, and so you had all the companies that are now part of the first phase of RIST. And then 4K, lots of 4K, some 8K we'll talk about, and then HDR. It's messy, as you know. There's so many different versions of it. But anyways, but you're seeing more and more of that out there, and different companies where, you know, maybe they only did HLG, and now they're doing more versions of it on their cards. J2K-XS, first we had Tico, I'll jump to that first, a year or two ago with Intupix. Really cool technology where you can do a 12G for 4K over a 3G circuit, which is really neat. It's a 4-to-1 compression, and it has very low latency because it's 3 to 5 lines. But now J2KXS is coming out with a 10-to-1 compression. So now you're looking at like maybe a 1.2 gig for a 4K, and then they're getting it down to 1 gig so you can get over 1 gig Ethernet. So you're going to start seeing more of that coming, which is really cool. We love J2K. We use a lot of it. HEVC, of course, is big. A lot of companies doing HEVC. I don't know about Mark. I swear every company and their brother is selling MPEG encoders now. It's like, you know, Marshall, like who used to make monitors and little cameras, they're selling encoders now. It's crazy how so many people are doing it. But HEVC is getting better and better. Don't forget, HEVC was designed for progressive, not interlaced. It's not efficient with interlaced, so that's something you got to remember. But it's getting better. And then AES 67, of course, 2110-30, and Dante, as he said, and Maddie. So now we'll jump into some of the pictures. Adder is a KVM company. We're using that at Hudson Yards. And last year they showed a little dongle that was really small they actually wore them around their necks at the show to show how small they were. And now this year they were showing a 4K version of that. So now you can have KVM over IP, but doing 4K to your monitor over IP, which is really neat. Of course, it's a bigger box. AdTech was showing their latest and greatest encoders, HEVC, of course, and then they're now doing 8 encoders in 1 rack unit. MediaKind's even doing more than that, but they're really big with a lot of the satellite truck guys, and so they're getting more and more audio codecs and everything else. They're just getting the compression ratios down more and more and more, so we can fit more into a satellite transponder, and obviously the new modulation schemes. AJ, this was one of my favorite finds of the show. I thought this was so cool. A lot of people want to walk away with an MPEG-4 file of a show, and there's not an easy way to do that, actually. There's one company called Chronology I'll show you later that does all the award shows, but this is really cool. So basically, it's an MPEG-4 recorder as a keypro, and you have 4 thumb drives on the left, so you plug in your drive, producer, director, whoever you want to be. You hit record, you could have a clean feed, a dirty feed, ISO cameras, whatever you want, hit record, stop, pull the thumb drive out, walk out of the show. Now, I went over to Nick, the president. I said, you got to fix one thing. And he said, what? I said, I love it. And here's the back of it, by the way. So you have 4 SDI in, 4 SDI out, HDMI in. I thought it was funny that, of course, you still have XLR audio for some of the analog guys, and there's still 2 RCA phono plugs on there, which is funny. Here we are doing, HD at 1.5 gigabits, and we're still got phono plugs. But anyways, I said to Nick, you need to add timecode burn-in and watermarking, because that's what Chronology does. Because, for big award shows, you cannot walk out of the truck with a clean show and a thumb drive. It's not, they don't allow it. So they need to add timecode burn-in. They were then showing their 2110 to HDMI converters. There's other companies like Evertz that has them, but this was something new, cheaper, and they are now offering packet merge. So now when you, like for us, when you have 2 routers, it'll switch automatically between the 2 2110 streams automatically. That's really cool, and they're very visible. Lights, didn't see one incandescent light on the whole showroom floor. LED is it, of course. That top one's a little tiny light to go on top of your camera. By the way, now you can have a Bluetooth, have an app on your phone, and you can sit there and change the light, change the temperature, and everything from your phone, which is really cool, because of course you can make it any temperature you want. And then that bottom left light, by the way, you're seeing the back side of it, but basically this one was like 2,000 lux, and it draws like 90 watts of power. It was really, really cool. Now, they're not cheap. They're still, a little pricey, but LED everywhere. Artel was showing their latest gateway card. They had like 90% of the telecom market at one time, and so they were showing their gateway card. And then, of course, you're starting to see, instead of 10 gig, 40 gigs, of course, Evertz starting to do 25 gig interfaces, and now people are doing 100 gigs. So that was their gateway card. Atem was showing their latest and greatest encoders, and their big thing, of course, is 4K, and of course, HDR. Adamus is an interesting company. They sell these really low-cost recorders, and when I did the match in Vegas with Tiger and Phil, I bought the Shogun Inferno up top on the right. It's a 4K. It even does 12G, by the way, on the input, not quad, because we don't want quad anymore. HDR, everything, ProRes recorder on an SSD. By the way, you can get a terabyte SSD now for $150. And anyways, plug it in, and it's a 1,000 nit monitor. And this thing's, like $1,200. So anyway, they're coming out with some really cool stuff. Shogun 7 was their new product. They have a new one now that does 4 channels at once recording, by the way. And then at the bottom left is a new 5-inch monitor. AviWest is a company we've used over the public internet. There's lots of companies doing over the public internet, as you know now. And so they're doing HEVC, and it's really neat stuff with ARQ, deep packet recovery and everything. Blackmagic. This was interesting. This was actually an 8K switcher, and you're like, really? But there was 2 8K cameras I saw on the floor. I don't know, Mark, how many you saw. I saw 1 8K monitor, but it's coming. But what's interesting about this is it's all on BNCs. So no fiber, it's all BNCs. So they chose to do it simple, but you know how we have quad 1080p for 4K? Well, the way they're doing this is it's quad 12G. So basically, this is 48 gigabits a second we're switching, right, in this switcher. And anyway, so I thought that was really interesting. Lots of BNC connectors, because you got 4 cables for everyone. But anyways, of course, they up, down, cross convert, all that stuff. And then they come out with a new 8K hyperdeck, which is very interesting. The left side is the hyperdeck. The right side's a new control panel. Thing I thought was funny was they literally have an in and out set edit points on this panel. And I thought, isn't that something? How long ago we did that back in the 3/4 inch days? But anyways, but it's funny how things come back. So it was an interesting thing. Oh, by the way, one thing too is they can do remote control with other devices, which is RS422. And then they come out with a new editing control panel, which I thought was funny because, you know, it's like we have a control panel, but, you know, we had that back in the CMX days. But anyways, you know, it's something new. Here again, coming back from the old to the new. So that was interesting. And they have a lot of really neat products, by the way. Canon, oh my gosh, they had so many new products. And this was just the lenses they came out with for Ultra HD. So that was interesting. Mark already showed you this. This was their new 122 times lens, which is 1,000 millimeters. One thing I want to tell you about, if you ever get a chance to see the Larry Thorpe presentation, it's amazing. But basically, one of the problems they've been having with Ultra HD is, of course, getting 4K across the whole glass, which has been a problem. So this lens is a little bit longer. The other thing is they're not getting wide anymore. And so that was always, so they've been like 10 millimeters, 12 millimeters, and now, as Mark said, they're down to 8 millimeters. And that's an issue, right? For soccer, they can't get the whole field in when you're not wide enough. And they were also saying for golf, right? Because golf, you have this big scaffolding, you're shooting straight down, you can't get a wide enough shot. So anyway, so that's something they've really been working on. And then they had another version of it, I think it was 111 times. And I would just want to show you an example of how, you know, these sets they build for NAB and how, you know, to show the cameras and the colors. It's really amazing. This guy was just sitting there sewing stuff the whole day. Then all their new prime lenses. I thought this was interesting. This is a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. And can you tell how short it is? It's a lot shorter than they used to be. So they used to be really long. So it was really neat lens, cool lens. This was an EOS camera, and they cut it in half. And look at all the elements in there. And I thought that was really neat how they did that. They just sliced it right down the middle so you can show how much in there. And this is mirrorless, of course. So that was neat. And then, of course, they're doing HDR monitors now. I thought, Mark, did you see this? I thought this was absolutely hilarious. This is a guy that invented a turret for a DSLR to rotate. When did we start doing that? But anyways, but I thought that's funny how that's coming back. The Cobalt had some new products. This is their new 16 or 18-way multiviewer that's 4K. They used to have a 5-way, so that was really neat, and it's a very reasonable price. This is their new up-down cross, everything in, everything out converter card, which is really neat. It's, of course, all open gear with them. And, of course, they're really big in wrist, by the way, with the over-the-internet. Decimator, love Decimator, really cool company out of Australia. They make really cool products for really cheap prices, and they work. They're great. They really didn't have anything new this year. The only thing they had was a quad 1080p for 4K to HDMI converter, which several of the companies are doing that, but they were doing that. By the way, if you're not familiar with their quad splits, $300 you can get a quad split that goes in an open gear frame, which is just crazy for a quad split. Anyway, so they're doing some really neat converting boxes. A lot of shows like Taylor Swift, things like that, where they're, you know, having to throw down boxes everywhere. They love their products because they're very, very reasonable. Dolby was showing their, of course, Dolby Vision, and then they had the Atmos going on, so it was 9.1. And then, but what was actually better was outside, they had an Atmos truck. And it was in front of the South Halls. This was really cool. I got lucky because I heard you couldn't get in it the first 3 days, and I went the last day at the end of the show, and they were showing the Atmos examples. They're driving this truck all over the country, and they're doing demo and teaching and training on Atmos. This was really cool. They had 2 demos. One was the drag racing that just happened the previous weekend in Vegas. That was really neat. By the way, they said when the 2 cars fire off and they start going 130 miles an hour, whatever it is. No, I'm sorry. It was 300 miles an hour. Sorry, 300 miles, whatever it is. It's 140 decibels, by the way, the mics have to pick up. That was really impressive in the truck, listening to that. And then they had this auto auction, which might sound boring, but it was really neat. You know, you felt like you really were in the stands, hearing the audio all the way over you. This was another of my favorite finds. I went back, Clyde Smith used to say, I like going back to the very corner of the hall and seeing the new guys. And this was a company from Korea. It was a little monitor. This is a 2.8-inch SDI SDHD 3G monitor that runs on USB power, and it's got a battery in it that runs for 2 hours. It's got a real BNC connector on it, not that little tiny connector, and it's $300. I've already ordered one from B&H, but it hasn't come in yet. I would have brought it to show people. But anyways, but think about that. You can carry that in your backpack and look at video anywhere you want. Embryonics, as you know, is huge in the SFP world with 2110, and so now they built a frame to plug all their SFPs in. You notice there's some big fans in there to keep them cool, because that's one of the issues is heat. And then they're doing multi-viewers now in the SFPs, which is really neat for 2110. And also, they're doing PTZ cameras now with their embryonics, SFPs, and everything. Really neat stuff. Evertz, of course, is a huge booth. I spend so much time in their booth. There's so many products to see. This is part of their new Scorpion line. They have a new fiber line. They're doing 25 gig, 40 gigs, 100 gigs. And this was a new little converter that pops into one of their frames. By the way, they have a card like this that does JPEG 2000. On one little tiny card, it plugs in the frame, so you could put a bunch of these in one rack unit and do J2K. It's really impressive. And then they're doing the software-defined stuff where you basically pay a license and you just get what you want. You want to up, down, cross, encode, decode, anything you want. You just buy the license and it puts it on the Blade server. So it's really neat. And then, of course, they're multi-viewing. They're doing 10 gig, of course, all the 10 gig interfaces with 2110 and everything. They were doing, last year, they were showing Dash 40, by the way, ahead of everybody. That was really neat. So their multi-viewers are huge. And then, of course, the touchscreen view system. By the way, I got a new flat screen curved monitor for my office, and I went there, and this one was bigger. And I was like, I got to get a bigger one now. But anyways, it was awesome. And then, of course, with Dreamcatcher that competes with EVS, they had their 4K and 4K. Now they have 8K. You know, they can zoom in on the players and all that, right? It's really neat. Of course, HDR and then HFR, high frame rate. It was really neat. And then their L-band matrix switchers, we use these, really cool. But what's neat about this L-band RF switch for a big facility is that it has a spectrum analyzer in the front of the frame. So you can see your carriers and look at everything just standing in front of the box. Really cool. Thought this was neat, a Dante-enabled microphone. So you're just coming IP right off the mic with Dante. Really neat. 4A was showing all their latest and greatest switchers. They're doing really well and big in the church market and very, very powerful. By the way, if you don't know about their switchers, they do some cool stuff like you can actually do effects on the aux buses. So you're not using an ME. You can actually do lower thirds, keys, and effects and everything on an aux bus on the output, which is really neat. And also, by the way, strip Hank and reinsert Hank on the output, which is really neat too. Flanders Scientific is in Atlanta. They were showing their latest and greatest HDR monitors. Their new HDR monitor is 3,500 nits. It's crazy. Most of them are 1,000 or 1,500. That's really, really bright. Anyways, GetFi is a company over in Asia. I thought that I saw them a couple years ago. I walked in the booth just to walk up and I asked them, are you doing 2110? Absolutely we are. And I thought, wow, you know, because there's all these US companies, you walk in, they're like, no, we're not there yet. You know, we're waiting for it to settle down, you know, that kind of stuff. And here this company's doing, a little company. This was a Dante-enabled speakers by a company called Glen Sound. I thought that was neat. Whoever thought we'd be plugging Ethernet into speakers now or fiber. Really cool. Grass Valley showing all their latest and greatest 2110 and IP products. This is an up, down, cross, everything card. This was a 2110 to HDMI interface. This was Harmonic showing their latest greatest encoding. One thing they're doing is they're using AI. So basically what they're doing is they're starting to learn the video. So think of like CNN, right? You have a person sitting there doing the news talking for hours and hours and hours, and it's repeatable. So basically they can keep doing that. This was interesting. It's an 8K where you could zoom in on the view and using a tennis match. So it's an 8K camera. You can zoom in and out in real time. It was really interesting. And then Hitachi showing their latest and greatest cameras, their CCUs, which does SMPTE and that. Another thing that was my favorite find of the show, if you're all familiar with VisTech Valid, it's how we do our lip sync measurements today. This is new. It's an app that runs on your iPad. You take your camera, you shoot the image on the iPad, you put the mic by it, and it reads it, sends it back to your home office, you know, like say it's ESPN, Turner, whatever, and it measures it within 1 millisecond, like within accuracy. So pretty cool. And by the way, the app's free, and you just got to buy their big reader. Anyways, and then Hikigami's showing all their latest, greatest cameras, your traditional CCUs for shading, virtual CCUs for OCPs for shading. I don't know about you, but there's other companies that have tried this. I walked up to one company, I won't say who it was last year, and I said, excuse me, have you ever shaded sports before when you're doing a football game outdoors and the clouds are rolling through the skies? And he goes, no. And I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't work. Anyway, so no. This was their little POV camera that competes with the little Marshalls, but bigger lenses. And then, of course, that was the Inca Gandhi's 8K camera. Remember, 48 gigabits per second. LiveView showing their latest and greatest HEVC. Now they're doing 4K or 41080p's. Oh, by the way, LiveView is also doing a return channel. So if you want to send video back, so like for CNN, the talent wants to see. By the way, you know, a lot of times we have to book a feed to get a feed back. Why? Because you cannot use Dish or Direct off the satellite truck, right? Because of latency, right? It's 14, 12 seconds behind. Nobody wants that. So Live View's doing that now. Mark already showed you the all-IP truck, so I'll skip over that. The only thing I thought was interesting about that truck, Mark, was that where you shaded at, there was a side door to get in and out of the truck. Not a good idea, but maybe they lock it for a show probably, because I know that's been a problem before on trucks. Anyways, and then the I/O bay. Let's see what else. Joseph Electronics was showing a new panel to go into venues, because as you know, that's a big deal, right? Having all the fiber interfaces at venues. And then I thought this was really cool. This, if anybody knows about fiber and lambdas, this is a light shifter. So basically, all your products are 1310 today. You run this in there, and there's 18 inputs. It phase shifts them all to CWDM. And then you have a box on the other end that shifts them back to 1310. You understand? So it goes back. Now you might say, wait a minute, you're putting 18 things, a whole lot of stuff on one fiber. Well, it actually does redundancy. So you can run 2 fibers around the venue, different paths, and it'll auto switch between them. So pretty cool. So they're doing that. And then Bluebell's a company over in Europe that they always show with their products. Layered had their latest and greatest LED walls. Oh my gosh, these things are just amazing. This one's 0.9 millimeters, millimeters for their pitch, and it looked absolutely incredible. So the resolution of this actual screen was 8K, so it was really neat. And then of course different sizes. They're really neat. Lilliput was showing their monitors. If you don't know them, they used to be in the consumer world. Now they're selling broadcast monitors with waveform monitors. Marshall, their new little POV is 4K now. This is their by the way, their CCU control, their OCP panel for the Marshall cameras. Have you ever used, they put them in the pylons, right, for the Super Bowl, if you remember that. And so this one controls at least 6 cameras, and it's cut the same size as the broadcast OCPs. So it'll go in the truck in the same place. Really neat, and they've gotten really big. And then MediaKind was showing they do 16 HEVC, MPEG-4, whatever you want, encoders in one rack unit, or 9 1080p's or 4Ks. I'm trying to hurry, sorry. MediaLinks was showing their 100 gig interfaces, and then of course they were showing, I think I got another slide here, JPEG 2000, ultra low latency. You all know there's a ULL standard now. We're now down to like 8 milliseconds. We're less than a field now with J2K, encode and decode. Really cool. Back in the day, they were 5 frames originally. Nevion, their big thing was registration discovery. That's an issue with 2110 today, as you know, and so with NMOS and all that and everything, and so that's their big. They're really pushing how they can handle registration and discovery. Really neat stuff, and and there's other companies actually starting to use their gear for that. And then I don't know if you heard, but VizRT bought NewTek, the toaster guys, remember, that did the TriCaster. And I'm dating myself, and so that was interesting. This really big graphics company that we use at Turner buying NewTek, and Mark already mentioned NDI, and so we'll see where that goes, because I think we need it to be a standard. So my SMPTE plug-in. Nikon cameras, Panasonic showing their cameras 4K. Fabrics, you already talked about fabrics, but the big thing was 4K, of course. Seeing a 12G eye pattern was really neat, and doing HDR and all that stuff. They're a neat company. By the way, this is a company that I found in the back corner of IBC one year, and as Clyde Smith said, and my only complaint about this is, like some of these other companies, I don't know if you guys heard this before, but they run on Linux, so they don't boot up quickly. So the old days when we used to go out to the side of the TV truck with the WFM90, and we would hit the button and we instantly had a picture. Those are gone. Now you got to wait for it to boot up. But anyways, Chronology does I mentioned them earlier, they do the H.264 recording for big award shows like the Oscars, and they do a watermarking and all that. Really neat stuff. They always do the Oscars, those big shows. Riedel showing all their new panels. Ross, oh my gosh, so many new products, but of course into scoreboarding and big sporting events. They bought this company that makes the Raptor and the Gecko and all these crazy names, Iggy. But this was a really smart deal with them, because Nestor's a really smart guy with them, and basically this is how they got into IP. So they're really big, they're starting to do 2110 and all the IP interfaces. This is their gateway card. Really powerful, really cool. And this is their router control panel, where it's virtual. It's a big screen like Evertz does. The days of programming buttons, no more, right? It's just a touch screen, and you just make it whatever you want. By the way, you want video on the side? No problem. We'll just stream you H.264 video and show it to you on your router panel. This is a new Carbonite Ultra, which is the one rack unit. So this whole 2ME switcher, everything, all the ins and outs and aux buses and everything is in one rack unit. You just buy the control panel. RTS showing their latest and greatest panels, and then Sencor getting into 2110, and this is a ASI recorder delay unit, by the way. And they were talking about doing delay for discovery with these, because they do 7-day delay, right, for disaster recovery. Really neat. Sharp, I was talking to somebody earlier about this, an 8K camera. The thing about this is that it records in 420, which I thought was interesting, and 8-bit. So anyways, but it's coming, and it was really interesting camera in how they do that. I think it's 200 megabits per second. And then Sharp, there was the 8K monitor they were showing at the show. Small HD, really popular with DSLR and guys that shoot multi-camera shoots. They're now able to control their DSLR cameras through the monitor. And so they're doing Red and Sony and different companies like that. They're doing, Arri is first and Red is coming next. And then, I don't know if you saw this or not, it was really interesting. It's basically, with AI, they're doing a green screen with no green screen. So that was impressive. That guy was just walking back and forth in the booth, and you see up top in the right the picture, and that was the video. It was really neat. So anyway, Sony, all their cameras, and then of course we already talked about the crystal LED screen, which is just looks amazing, and then of course their HDR monitors. These are still LCD because OLED only goes so bright. So they were showing all their HDR monitors, and then of course their OLED monitors that we love for shading. Their big switchers, the 8000, 9000, everything. These are, big switchers like the Cayenne from Grass Valley, and then sound devices showing their recorders, new mixers. That little mixer right there in the bottom can virtually do 36 channels on that mixer, by the way. Really impressive. Of course, as Mark said, Dante all over the place. Studio Technologies, if you want to just do audio to SMPTE-NY back and forth, really cool. A lot of wireless units for wireless cameras. Tag, I'm hurrying, I'm almost done. Tag multi-viewing, they've exploded from Israel, by the way. I remember when they had one 55-inch screen at NAB, and now look at their booth. So they're doing really well. This was them showing 2022-7 demo. A multi-viewer company, and they're showing switching between a main and a backup path, switching between the packets. Really, really neat, and giving you all the statistics from it, by the way. Tektronix, of course, showing all the latest and greatest software on the Prism, which is their 2110 waveform vector and all that in audio, and of course PTP timing and all that. TSL, love TSL. This was their new latest and greatest audio units. Of course, they're doing Maddie, Dante, 2110, you name it, they're doing everything. And they sound great, so really like their products. And then this was TV Logic showing an HDR monitor. Utah Scientific showing their latest and greatest 2110 and SDI. Their big thing is going back and forth and not just obsoleting everything and switching back and forth between your systems. So that was a 288, by the way, square SDI router. It's only like 1 inch thick, by the way. And then coming to the end, we have a 1,000-channel IPTV system at CNN. We use the Easy TV player for our desktop view, single pane, double pane, quad split, and 9-way, so you can see 9 things at once. One of the issues is they use a plug-in. Well, if you all heard, plugins are going away. So everyone was really concerned about that. And so they now have a fully working Easy TV IPTV player for HTML5. And it was fully working. And as you hover on the bottom, by the way, through your channel lineup, you actually see live video as you hover over each logo live. It's really, really impressive, really cool. And of course, by the way, bugs on the left side for all the networks, by the way. You put your bugs in there. Their encoders are doing 8 channels per blade now, so you can do, instead of 52, 104 channels in there. They are coming out with 2110, by the way, in September. Mark already showed you the amazing water effect. I thought that was really cool. And then Wohler was showing their latest and greatest projects. They're now doing SMPTE 2110 now, and all the other versions, AES 67, all that. Let me think what else. I'm getting to the end here. Yellow Brick was showing a little converter down there for 1080p and 4K for UHD. And then on the top left, this is I think it's called the Green Machine, right, or something like that. The Green Machine. This is like an up, down, cross, anything out, and you buy a license. So basically, you buy what you want the box to do, and then you just load it. They send it to you. You load it, and boom, now the box does it. And their new thing was HDR and SDR, right? Because as you start doing HDR, you still got to go back to SDR, and some people are taking SDR and they're converting it. So they're doing all that in there in that little tiny green box. And then the last thing is the IP showcase is scaled way down this year because so many people are doing 2110 in their booths now. They just had a small setup there on the left, and then on the right was where they did training. So the big thing was training classes for all the days of NAB, and I think Wes Simpson, I know, was heading that up, recording it and all that stuff. So that was really neat. So they had a lot of classes on 2110 PTP and all that. And then I think you already mentioned, somebody mentioned Diversified. This was their IP showcase, road show that they're taking around the country with all versions of IP of a 2110 inside of their box, and including a multi-viewer so you can see it all. And that's it. Thank you.
Bob, if you don't mind, I'm just going to handcuff myself to you next year, and that was amazing. Yeah, you reminded me how tired I was. But for those of you who've been part of the New York section for a long time, you'll all know David Lightner pretty well. He's a SMPTE fellow. He's one of the greatest New York-based cinematographers. He's also a director and a producer, and he's been a long time. He's also the producer with me. So I think that's all I need to say. He's just really one of our most valuable members. So David, if you would mind coming up. So.
Has your head exploded yet? Thought I had the unenviable task of following Mark Shubin, which no one ever wants to do. And just to discover, I also have the unenviable task of following Bob Baker, who is a force of nature. And I'm so happy he came all the way up from Atlanta. I know Atlanta. I'm from Chattanooga. I don't know if we've are you from Atlanta originally? No, I didn't hear that accent. I saw Hank Aaron hit his 500th home run. I really am from Chattanooga. And I am not going to speak as fast. I normally do, but just to be different, I'm going to speak a little more slowly. Let's see if we've gotten this up. What I've got up here is I'm going to be reading my notes off my presentation. There's a second computer in the back. Is that not working? I'm from that tribe of people that use Macintoshes, which SMPTE seems not to know much about. Yeah, there's something loose. Like Mark, and I've just learned like Bob, I used to walk every aisle, or I tried, to walk every aisle of NAB, or I thought I tried to walk every aisle of NAB. I can't do that anymore. So I don't even try. And this NAB, and I don't know how many I've been to, I don't know, 25. I'm not in Mark's league. I targeted things. I went to things I was interested in. So what you're going to see a little bit from my presentation is what I was interested in seeing. It takes a village. If you're listening to this via streaming, hold tight. I think it'll be worth it. At the outset, I thought that Bob and Mark and I ought to coordinate our presentations to make sure we weren't covering the same territory. And then I gave it some thought and realized that I wouldn't be covering what Mark's covering. I can't. And from everything I knew about Bob, I suspected he'd go in a third direction, and I was mostly right. So I'm going to talk about more tangible stuff, in my view. And I'm tap dancing while we're waiting for this to come up. Do we see it? It's coming. I have a slightly, I don't know if it's fair to characterize Mark's outlook is cynical, but I share a slightly distanced look at the whole phenomenon of NAB, and because I've gone to enough of them, I see every new NAB in the context of the previous ones, which translates into, from my perspective, some sense of where the industry is, what the industry is, where the industry is going, where it's come from. So that's going to inform my presentation a little bit. I tend to digress. Just go down the rabbit hole with me each time I do that. We'll come back up for air, you'll see. Well, that's looking close. Can we go the first slide? Yikes. If you walk too close to that, the image quality is not so... Okay. So I'm going to talk about NAB 2019, as did the previous two speakers. I called it Virtualization Services Gear. Next slide. Do you have to manually do the slides? Yeah, because I can't put the USB in. Fine. Try another one. I mean, go to the next slide. No, that's not the next slide. But it's true, that's great. I just love technology. No, you're nowhere close. Can you go back to the first slide? You're jumping around. Can you use the arrow buttons? Yep. This is 1. Okay, go to 2. 2. There you go. There you go. Not your grandfather's NAB. It's the little theme I want to strike. Okay, the next slide, please. So NAB is older than we are, and what do I mean by that? Please, yeah, itchy trigger finger. Go back one, please. NAB is older than we are. NAB was founded around, I think, 1922. Go to the next one. These are some... just a second, I'm going to catch up with you. It's only SMPTE. Okay, can we stay on that one? Okay. So NAB, and I'm going to be reading from notes a little bit because I wrote some specific things that I want to communicate. NAB was founded in 1922 as a private trade association. Its purpose originally was to establish a code of ethics and guidelines for self-regulation within the broadcast industry, and I think the politics of the day was they were afraid of the government stepping in, so they decided they'd regulate themselves. It was originally the National Association of Radio Broadcasters. It changed its name to the National Association of Radio and TV Broadcasters in 1951, and then changed it to NAB in 1958. This used to be called The Big Show. It bounced between Washington, D.C. and Chicago for years before, in our time, landing in Las Vegas. You can see there aren't many faces of color in this. This was a pretty much all-white gathering of men, typical of its time. Next slide. This is NAB 2019. We're in a different world. We really are. It's a world that I don't entirely belong to at my age. There are several generations, millennials, Gen Xers, other people who are now running things, and they think differently. I don't have any tattoos. Next slide. Is this? I think it's good. Okay, thank you. for instance, this year at NAB, that's Iran Broadcasting on the left. And that's a research industry from research university from Tehran on the right. That's the country we're about to go to war with. And they were at NAB. So this is not the NAB of the past. I think you'll have to do it. This is from a sister religion at NAB this year. I'm noticing, by the way, these slides are unbelievably saturated, so, you know, they look great here. Sorry you can't see that, because I grade everything. I grade everything I shoot, and that includes still photographs. So it's a polyglot industry now. Next slide. Except for, you know, the occasional throwback to 1947. Again, I'm from the South, so that used to be a common sight. So next slide. So it's not so clear that much of the show has to do with broadcasting any longer. At least that emotionally is what it feels like. Next slide. There are these new players. That Cheshire Cat grin up there. Next slide. You know what that is, what it means. Next slide. This was in South Hall. It says quality, simplicity, scale, all in a single platform. And then in the back it says delivering the future of media. What could that be? Next slide. TV-like quality. Next slide. Verizon. See what's going on here? Next slide. And then I couldn't resist throwing this one in too. Proud members of the new Netflix Technology Alliance. Yeah, you're groaning on behalf of me. Next slide. Now, I knew NAB originally, remember, I'm from the South, because I used to put these bugs at the end of shows. Most of us of my age first encountered NAB through the NAB television code. Remember, the original organization was founded to police and regulate itself. This seal was shown in the closing credits of most American television programs from 1952 until the early 70s. Typically, what you'd hear at the end of the show is this, and put in your local station. This station is a subscriber in good standing to the television code of the National Association of Broadcasters. This seal of good practice is your assurance of high television standards in the public interest. So this is all high-minded stuff. We'll leave aside NAB's role as a lobbyist in Washington the past couple of decades. It's high-minded stuff. Next slide. So I always kind of find it weird to wind up in Las Vegas. It's incessant weirdness. I don't know if you can read that one on the right. You can't make this stuff up. So I always feel a sense of unease in Vegas. I like NAB. I'm on an alien planet, and I feel those two things at the same time. Now, the first thing I came across, next slide, and Mark had a picture of this too. In the North Hall was this old RCA TK45A. It was at the Museum of Broadcasting's booth, and it was in use from 1975 to 1988 at Yankee Stadium by the Tribune Broadcasting Company. It was WPIX Channel 11, as you can see. Next slide. Here you can see the magic and the mystery of a classic Plemicon tube. Next slide. Meet the young fellow who designed the low-voltage preamp for this camera in 1968. Attending his 52nd NAB and now representing Canon's innovative broadcast and cinema lenses. He told me that. Next slide. I also encountered the newsstand when I entered North Hall. This year, 2 publications caught my eye. Next slide. When did being a student filmmaker become an occupation that needs a magazine? On the right side, if you read at the bottom, it says the camera to beat in 2019 is a Nikon, and this is NAB. Again, this dissociation from what my reality is. Next slide. So attendance was down this year by 1.6% if you read the press releases. The press releases did not mention how many booths they were short this year compared to last year, how many companies didn't show up. It was rumored that there were 20% fewer exhibitors compared to 2018. I don't know the exact number, but that's not far from what I saw in Mark's numbers. Missing in action, next slide, were Chinese grip and lighting manufacturers compared to last year. Next slide. That was Central Hall 2018. Next slide. That's Central Hall 2019, same spot, empty. You couldn't help but notice that. Next slide. Missing in action at 2019 NAB, drones. Now, Mark Foreman and I went to Hoover Dam one night, and I shot that at Hoover Dam, and that's why it says Operation Prohibited. But I love that symbol. And I maybe saw one drone at all of NAB. No drone cages. Now, over the past several years, they've been ubiquitous, that buzzing, mosquito-like noise. Zero. What does that tell you? Next slide. Missing in action were various companies that we've gotten used to seeing: Freefly, Able Cine, Red, Edelkrone, DJI, Red Rock. There were at least 20 more that I knew of. I just put a short list on. Next slide. So at the beginning, I called this virtualization services and gear. Next slide. By virtualization, what I mean, and this is my term, but you all understand that virtualization means you take something that's physical and you turn it into something that's software or equivalent. So that includes SMPTE 2110 suite of standards, the trend we all understand toward IP and IT solutions, file-based workflows utilizing solid-state media, the fact that big iron editing and color correction and audio mixing have all transformed into software-only software packages. Production hardware as well has been transformed into apps, and that includes slates and waveform monitors and light meters and all kinds of things you can have on your smartphone if you want. Next slide. So in terms of services, what I mean by that at NAB 2019 are cloud computing services mostly. It's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and archiving. And that you all understand too. The third category of things I encountered at NAB, next slide, is gear. And gear is what I want to talk about tonight. And I'm from the production side, so I tend to gravitate towards that sort of thing. And I'm happily in that camp most of the time. Next slide. Now, I saw the same Canon Eos mirrorless camera, and I thought that was really neat. I love it when they saw cameras in half and lenses, and I've got a whole collection of photographs of various lenses. I love the complexity of this one because it's showing you the optics and the electronics and the shape and everything. It's just laid bare, and the density of it is remarkable. And you can't miniaturize that any further, or you would not get the same result. You can't turn that into a piece of software. It's tangible, it's touchable, it's visible. Next slide. And I just want to make the point that photography can be made computational, and photographic gear is subject to miniaturization. Think motorized gimbal stabilizers and their drone cousins. But these things can't be made virtual and will never be made virtual, and that's professional motion picture cameras, professional motion picture lenses, pro camera support like dollies and sliders and tripods, large area lighting like space lights, mics, monitors, batteries, and I'm sure there's quite a few more like stands. These things will not be miniaturized. So I remain interested in those because I'm interested in everything from design to material science to utility. I'm always watching what companies are coming up with, and we're in an amazingly innovative time right now across the board, as everyone understands. Next slide. So this is the front cover of John Fowler's Film and Digital Times, the NAB issue, and you can see he calls it the big picture. These are all large format, or full frame rather, sensor cameras. And there's not a major camera company that doesn't have a so-called full frame large sensor camera now. At a time when everything else seems to be shrinking, the sensors seem to be getting larger, and so do the requisite lenses that you need for a target that large. Next slide. So I'm going to look at cameras for a moment. Next slide. This bad boy is the new Arri Alexa LF for large format, Mini LF. At the time this showed up at NAB, there were only 2 in the country. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was a kind of prototype. And I was told by Arri that I had to come see it by Tuesday because it was going to be gone Tuesday afternoon, and it was. So they're traveling this around the country and probably around the world. The Alexa Mini has taken off like a rocket. If you look at the major films at the Cannes Film Festival, IndieWire did a list of what cameras were used to shoot almost most of the major films. Most of them were Alexa Mini. And the reason for that is you get all the goodness of an Arri Alexa in a very small package. And small packages are great in every way. Arri still, of course, prefers that you would use their larger full Alexa, but most of the people I know in the field want the Mini. So this is the Mini LF. This is the Mini with a large full-frame sensor in it. You might notice, can I point a laser at this screen? Will it damage it? Let's find out. I don't know if you can see this, but on the side here, there is a LCD panel that's showing the image that the camera's taking. And that LCD image can be used for various things. I'll come back to that in a second. Down here, there's an advanced focus knob. It has electronics in it and a display, and you turn it and it electronically focuses the lens through a little servo motor. Let's go to the next slide. Here you can see that same LCD, and now instead of showing picture, it's showing menu, user interface. And you can see how it's folded out from the side of what is also a viewfinder. So Arri has this really interesting mashup of an LCD and a viewfinder, which I happen to think is terrific. It's what makes Arri when they do innovative things like that. Next slide. Sony talked about their decapitated camera, the Venice. I remember years ago when they're a little late to the game here because Arri had done this and other people, and when the Arri Alexa, the headless version of the Arri Alexa came out, they called it the Alexa M for Marie Antoinette. But anyway, this is the Venice extension system. They announced it last fall at IBC. The independent head, this part here minus the lens weighs about, I think, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, I'm sorry. 3 pounds with the E-mount. It's 4 pounds if you use the PL mount or the large PL mount that they've got on it now. And you can move this head 9 to 18 feet away from the camera with no signal loss. So that's remarkable. There are many places where this small camera, which more resembles a DSLR, can get into, even though the lens is always going to be quite large. Next slide. I'm glad they did that. This is 2/3 inch camera introduced by Sony. They've introduced a couple of global sensor cameras this year at NAB, and global shutter sensor cameras. And you understand that has to do with the Jello cam. When you pan, you don't want the image doing like this. And I also noticed they have, there's an HDC 3500, there's an HDC P50, a POV camera. There's a bunch of them based on the same 2/3 inch sensor, 3 2/3 inch sensors. Next slide. But I noticed that they were also saying that they could do ST2110 here. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I wanted to know more about that, and there's a reason. Next slide. This is the CCU for this camera. And for this CCU, you need a special interface kit to add the 2110 capability. And per Sony, the optional interface that adds 2110 provides, audio and video over IP capability. Next slide, please. What's been bothering me is I've been wondering what the connector is like, and I've been asking this over and over again, because of course it's going to be an RJ45 of some sort, right? This is the rear end of that CCU, and you can see two conventional jacks here for RJ45, but you see two up here, and that's what's on that optional card that you add to get the 2110 capability. Now these look a little bit more robust, but I'm a guy that's working in the field all the time, and every time I look at an RJ45, I don't think it's very robust. You know, I'm from a world of SDI, BNC connectors and XLR connectors and things like that that can really take a beating. Next slide. These boards are SDI converter boards that Sony introduced, SDI to IP converter boards. There's a lot of it, 2110, we talked about that. In the last slide, what I meant to add is that if you go and check mil-spec for RJ45 interconnects, they're much sturdier. They often have some kind of locking mechanism. The military specifies that because they've been using Ethernet for a long time. And I keep looking at what we're doing in our industry, and I keep thinking it's not going to hold up. It's not rugged enough. It doesn't have like a robust metallic or mechanical shell that locks it together like a bunch of XLR connectors. What you'd need in a battlefield, because typically the RJ45 interconnects are on the end of these boards like this. They're soldered onto a board. Next slide. Now, before I leave Sony, Sony, like the rest of the industry, sees this kind of interconnectedness. Everything is interconnected via 2110 and other IP protocols. Next slide. Anywhere, anytime, any platform, etc. It's an amazing era that we're all moving into. And some of us are getting there faster than others. But again, I work on the ground, I'm working with crews, and I'm thinking about this. Next slide. Over at Panasonic's booth, I noticed that there was an RJ45 connector on the back of an EVA-1. And so I asked about it, and I spoke to the product engineer, Yusuke Ota. Ota-san, are you here tonight? I don't see you, but anyway, and he told me that it was for streaming, for the internet, for like a QoS stream, quality of service network management stream, or Wi-Fi or cellular or something like that, not for 2110. But then I asked about my question about the robustness of these connections. Next slide. And he sent me over to Nutric to look at this kind of a connector. And you can see the RJ45 that's inside of that metal shell. It looks a lot like an XLR that has an RJ45 inside of it. And that's what I think is going to happen. I may be obsessed by this, but I keep asking, and I'm not getting good answers from people. As 2110 connectivity shows up on the cameras I'm using, it's important that I have confidence that connector is not just the traditional RJ45 that's made of clear plastic. Next slide. At Panasonic, I also came across this impressive underwater housing from Nauticam. And the 4K of this tiger shark was incredibly impressive. I mean, you literally stepped back as it came towards you. Next slide. So I said Red wasn't at NAB, but actually they were. They sort of cheated. They rented a small room in the North Hall upstairs. They did the same thing last year, actually. And I found that room and talked to them because they were introducing at NAB a new camera called Red Ranger. And Red Ranger, it's this camera here. And if you know Red's products, they had those little boxy shapes. This is a longer shape. And this longer shape is very much like a Sony Venice. And that's interesting. What's also interesting is that this is only for the rental market. They're not going to sell it. I don't know what sense that makes, but that's what they say. Only available at red authorized rental houses. They have a shimmed PL mount in the front for the lenses. Rental houses like that. They've added a much larger fan up here, which implies that smaller fans in the past weren't entirely adequate for better thermal performance. You have your choice of a V-lock or a gold mount. And next slide. This is the view from above, and again, you can see that really quite large fan. And again, from my perspective, when I see that, I'm always thinking about, what do you do in the rain? It's kind of weird to see big openings in the tops of cameras. Next slide. I also saw this new module from Teradek at this red room. And the module is this piece right here. And you'll recognize this is the UI of an Alexa. So it basically turns your red into an Alexa in terms of the interface. Interesting, from a company called Teradek. Next slide. You might be wondering what this bad boy is. Next slide. And I hate to tell you, but it's an iPhone. I don't know. You know, the iPhone probably cost a fraction of all this other crap they've put together. Next slide. And these speak for themselves. This was seen at the Insta360 booth. Next slide. Now, in the past when I do these presentations, I always slightly make fun of some of the outrageous ergonomic or ideas to attach cameras to your body because you don't know how to hand-hold a shoulder-mount camera. And this guy was really a good sport about it, and you see that he's fixing this big thing up and putting it on himself, and then he's quite proud. Next slide. But when you look closely, it's a little tiny 3-pound Canon C300. That's what I can't get past. It's got all this superstructure built on him for a little tiny camera. Next slide. I don't know what to say. I never quite know it. I mean, it's impressive engineering. Next slide. This one is called the Tiltimax Armorman. And this is like, I call it cyborg ergonomics. It's like this whole claw thing, you attach this further rig that has the camera on it to the end of these two claws that come out of the top of both sides of you. And they put it on this mannequin that's dressed up like, I don't know, an army ranger. To imply what? Warfare? I don't know. Next slide. So let's look at lenses for a second. Cook, of course, has been coming out with new full-frame lenses. These happen to be anamorphic full-frame lenses. Beautiful, beautiful, very expensive. Next slide. Fujinon came out with a pair of zoom full-frame lenses, which is sorely needed, and there was a lot of excitement about this. These were announced just before NAB, so this was a big item at NAB, and both are T2.9, which is pretty reasonable, actually. Next slide. Sigma has jumped into this game. They've been at NAB for a couple of years showing their cine lenses. I don't have any problem calling full frame 6K to 8K, whatever. Next slide. I just find it's weird when you call it an 8K zoom lens. I don't know what that means. And down here, these are called 8K primes. What does that mean? If anyone knows, tell me later. That has, of course, to do with sensor resolution, but it has nothing to do with lens resolution. Next slide. It's obviously marketing. I looked at the same camera. I guess I drank the Kool-Aid, Mark. I didn't realize that another company had bested them, but I was impressed by this camera too. Next slide. With the 2x extender, you can get 2,000 millimeter. Now, you have to admit that's pretty damn cool. It is, come on. And it's also 1.7, which is frigging amazing. Next slide. Now, this is a slide from a presentation that Larry Thorpe gave, and I just thought I'd share it with you because it's kind of interesting. One of the innovations that Sony announced at NAB was a new image stabilization system. And how this is different is, in this sort of arrangement where you've got a big box lens on and you're shooting sports, when you have an optically stabilized lens, it's often the case that if you pan at just slightly too fast of a speed, there's a stickiness, and you can see it. If you've ever used optically stabilized lenses, even on consumer DSLRs or whatever, you'll see the stickiness. Well, they've gotten rid of what they call image lag. They've rethought how this works, and I take Larry's word for it that it works, but I was appreciative that someone chose to address this problem. Next slide. This is another Canon innovation that I thought was particularly interesting. It's called ARIA, for Automatic Restoration of Illumination Attenuation. I don't know why it has to have that kind of name, but whatever. Basically, it's a collaboration between Sony and Canon. A lot of people shoot with Canon lenses, big box lenses, on Sony cameras. So what if the Canon lenses and the Sony camera could collaborate to address the issue of ramping? Ramping is when you have a very long zoom lens, and as you zoom, if you're at the widest aperture, you zoom to the very end of the lens, it suddenly starts dimming at the end. That's what this isn't working, but that's what, see the green line over in the middle on the XY axis, how it suddenly goes down? That's illumination from the lens ramping as the lens reaches the long telephoto end of its zoom. So basically, now the camera and the lens will talk to each other. This image at the bottom represents the very long, let's say 1,000 millimeters. You're at 1,000 millimeters with this zoom, this is what you get. This is a guy up in a skybox or something. But with the ARIA working, this is what you get. And I think that they're probably floating gain. I don't know how they're doing it, but the point is that it's seamless. So now you don't have to worry about that. And I work with zoom lenses all the time, and I constantly have to deal with this. So I'm really impressed by this, and I'm particularly impressed that it was a collaboration between these two companies. Next slide. Batteries. This is just a quick glimpse. If you've never looked at the inside of a battery, camera battery, these are the same 18650 cells that are in your Tesla. And they're in all the camera batteries. They're standard lithium-ion batteries, and I don't see batteries broken open like that very often. Next slide. Media. SanDisk came out with a couple of things. This thing they're calling an extreme micro SD. Great, micro SD. We need extreme now. This is the one that if you sneeze, you'll never find it. And this one over here, I'm not kidding. This one over here, you can see it's in my hand. You can see about what the size of it is, and they don't even have a name for it. It says demo card. But it's type of a CF Express is what it's going to be called generically, and that's Compact Flash Express. Faster, more capacity, not cheaper. Next slide. But coming soon to a camera near you. Next, thank you. Now, they say you can't build a better mousetrap, but occasionally somebody does. This is a new set of carbon fiber legs from Vitek. Vitek owns Vinton, they own Sockler, they own everything in the world that has to do with tripods. And these legs have there's only one way to extend these legs, and that's this red handle on top. You open that handle, and the entire leg positions anywhere you want it to. Close that handle, and it's locked. And it works extremely well. They've figured out these aren't tubular carbon fiber legs. They're kind of like this. And I have to tell you, there is no torque at the top of this tripod. It does not torque, and almost all mechanical tripods do to some extent. I was astonished by this. It's like they finally got it right. And over on the right is a Vinton version of the same thing. Now, these aren't cheap. They're like they're above $3,000. They're north of $3,000. But they're extraordinary. I would like one someday myself. This next slide. This gives new meaning to slider. Over here, you see this camera, it's on this thing that looks like a baton that a policeman might hit you with. And down here, all of a sudden, it seems like it's longer, I'm not going to make that joke. So down here, you can see something going on. Let's go to the next slide and hit the return button on the computer. See what's going on? There's a linear motor in that tube. You have, and this is sped up, as you can see. You have a slow slider, motorized, and you have a way to boom a camera up and down. I was astonished by how imaginative this was. Of course, the batteries are in that tube as well. Interesting, huh? Lightweight. Much easier than rigging a whole big slider with a bunch of rails and all of that. This is also something I'd like to experiment with. I just think it's great. And they had an FS7 on the thing, and that's not that light. I mean, by the time you get all that a lens on it. So next slide, please. This is something called Gimbal Guru, and I'm only throwing this up. It has, up here is the camera, and it's kind of a 360-ish type of camera, even though it looks like it has eyes and ears. And down at the bottom, what the part of me that does design and occasionally invent things, down here, look at these tires. They're like rubber rollers set at an oblique angle. I don't know what the purpose is. I just thought it was the coolest thing I saw there mechanically. Next slide. This was another movable camera. It's on this little motorized dolly. The work done on the suspension is amazing. I'm sure this thing, costs as much as it looks like it costs like. Down over here, you can see the control. Go back just for a second, please. And I actually had a video of this because I thought it was amazing. This right here is a gimbal. So if this thing were going over rough road, it was bouncing like that, the camera, and there were various cameras. There was a Venice up here at one point. There was an Alexa at one point. He switched various cameras in and out. The camera is perfectly steady. Now, on a film set, that could solve a lot of problems. It's just interesting. It's like another tool in the tool chest. Next slide. This, I thought, was astonishing. It probably doesn't look like much to you. It's just a dolly. It's a new Panther dolly, brand new, and it's all electronic. No pneumatic anything in this. Next slide. This arm right here goes all the way straight up. It doesn't have that banana shape that they used to in the past. And this arm can swing all the way below the ground level, pivoted right here. If this is 3 feet high, it can go 3 feet below the floor if you were to wish to do such a thing. You don't ever change the wheels. The wheels adjust between narrow track and wider gauge track. They have thought of everything. And this thing runs for a couple of days on a charge. I'm sure it's not cheap, but it's typical German design. They thought of everything, and I spent like 45 minutes going over this, and I'm just shaking my, it's what you want. And it's what you want. Next slide. Now, if you have very expensive taste, you can turn your Lamborghini into a camera platform. I don't know the purpose of this really, but it was just sort of interesting. Next slide. You could take your very expensive electric car, and where the engine used to be, you could bolt this sort of device. I don't know. I mean, the car was cool. Next slide. Lighting. Lighting has changed. Next slide. You all know this in every respect. Next slide. Except for what I think are some Fresnels, some tungsten Fresnels up here, but anyway. These are surface-mounted devices, these big yellow patches, and you're seeing these show up everywhere, including at bulbs from Home Depot. These are going to become more and more and more common, and they determine what you can do. They're a big, bright patch. The smaller they get, the more they approach a point source, but then the dimmer they get. So every time I look at a light designed with this, I keep looking at the compromises and trade-offs that are made. It's a fascinating time to be following this stuff. Next slide. This guy built a space light. A space light's that big light you hang from the ceiling. You see them in studios. They often have bags attached to them, like big cylindrical bags, and they just light a big space. But what's cool about this is that this is LED based, and he can go between tungsten and daylight with the flick of a switch. I thought it was very imaginative, very interesting, and it's obviously low power compared to other light sources of types of light. Next slide. This has been an idea that's just been waiting to happen. That's obviously one of these fabric pieces with LEDs that have little micro lenses in front of them. They project forward. And the second frame is obviously diffusion. But look how lightweight this is. I've been waiting to see something like this, and I finally did. This was at the Xylight booth. Next slide. This is a company from Beijing doing very interesting things. This is like a 12 light over here. Everything weighs nothing. You can kind of see what the setup is here. Lots of light, certain power requirements, but all in all, it's just everything is so much less than it used to be. Less power, less weight, faster setup, more control. Next slide. This I thought was truly interesting. This is a so-called waterproof outdoor LED light, but these are gigantic lenses. These are gigantic convex lenses that are put on top of these giant, they're probably SMD, surface mount devices. And they're like, the little tiny LEDs you're so used to that have the little lens, clear plastic lens on top. These are like giant versions of that. And the light that was thrown on the ceiling was really even and very directional. I played with this for a while, and it was, again, just really innovative. Who would have thunk of it? Next slide. Editing, just a few things to say here. Bob mentioned Blackmagic Design. I don't think anybody mentioned DaVinci Resolve 16, but the one thing they added is they added a new page. Now, down along the bottom here, you can't really read these, but they have what are called pages. One page is for the output of the file when you're done grading. Another page is the color page where you do the color manipulation. Another page is a page where you manipulate sound. Another page is where you do editing. They added a new page this year, and it's called CUT, C-U-T. And what it is, it's for speed editing. Because apparently, and I'm guessing, I heard Grant explain this, and what I read between the lines is that millennials they want to cut faster. They want to throw things together faster. That's why Final Cut Pro 10 is so popular among certain groups of people. This is Blackmagic Design's version of Final Cut Pro 10. You see the single picture line, which Apple calls a storyline. You see there's one line of images on top. There's just, you don't see all the audio tracks, you just see the one audio track appended. I don't know, I thought it was interesting. And this is coexisting with right next to it is the page for conventional editing that looks like Premiere Pro or looks like an old Final Cut Pro 7 page. Next slide. Now, this was also mentioned, I think Bob mentioned this, Bob mentioned that it was also patterned after a CMX keyboard, which, it was like back to the 1980s. Next slide. VR and 360, I don't have much to say about this year. Last year I showed a whole bunch of different cameras. I found that there were far, far fewer 360-degree camera rigs on display this year compared to last, similar to drones missing from the show. Although people look just as silly and disconnected as ever wearing these headsets. Next, that was a low blow. Next slide. But it's true. Monitors and displays, several people have mentioned this, the Crystal LED display system from Sony. And as Mark pointed out, you stand to the side of it and you see the reflections coming in from the side, so that's a problem. It's a problem for, the direct view. I haven't seen a direct view system yet that doesn't have that problem. They are coming to market, as you know. I don't think there's, I think they're inevitable for lots of reasons, not just unions. Next slide. But also at NAB, where every possible shape of large screens. These are shaped like just whatever you can think of. This is actually over here on the right is inside of this curved piece. And we're just now in the Blade Runner era, where we're going to see images on everything. I expect to lift a toilet seat at some point and see an image on it, motion image. Next slide. You mark my words, it'll come. It was on the back of a backpack. Next slide. Now these were some Sony professional monitors on display. And what's interesting about this is nowhere on this doesn't mention OLED. In fact, what it says is, it says HDR, new tech, LCD master monitor, new tech. What does that mean? And what happened to the OLEDs? And my understanding is that the OLED market is collapsing, and manufacturers are in trouble. The ones manufacturing large OLED screens, not small ones for smartphones. Check, if you're not familiar with all of this, check and see if I'm not right. So it looks to me like Sony's steered away from OLED in the future. They're not going to come back to it. There are competitive technologies, as quantum dot and whatnot, that you probably all know about. But I thought that was really interesting. Someone told me they were using Panasonic panels, but I didn't really say that, so I don't really know if that's true. Next slide. One of my favorite monitor booths was this one, because they had the drop test area for the drop-proof monitor. And basically, you put the monitor on this device here, and you crank it up, and you let it drop. That was kind of fun. Sense of humor. Here's the latest in small field monitors. Next slide. And this guy, he's using his small little camera. He's got this big Israeli arm on it. And what's this right here? Next slide. It's an iPhone. And what you'll notice about this is that he's watching a horizontal picture on a vertical iPhone. And you'll also notice that the picture on his flip-out LCD screen is bigger than the one on the iPhone. We're a complicated species. Next slide. 8K. I'm not going to say much about this, but the first thing I saw at NAB this year were these Blackmagic Design advertisements for all of their 8K stuff. And I thought that was significant. That meant something to me. That put me in an 8K frame of mind. The one thing I didn't see anything of this year at NAB was HD. I don't think I saw HD spelled out anywhere. It's like it's gone the way of SD, it seems like, at NAB. Next slide. When you have an 8K workflow demonstration from B&H, you know that it's reached a certain level. Next slide. At the Panasonic booth, Mark was talking about the use of tracking technology. We're all reading about this. San Francisco just outlawed it, as you know. Beijing can't live without it. Here, these guys are walking around this set, and this is tracking various things focused on the rectangles. Obviously, represent frames. They're using 8K because 8K provides enough resolution to play around in. Next slide. Here you can see there's one camera, right? I think this was a camera here, if I'm not wrong. I know this was a camera here. There were a couple of cameras spread around that were following these people as they were moving around. Next slide. I also went to the same demonstration that Mark went to. That's me. That's me right there in front. I actually videoed this as well, but I didn't show the video. Same thing. And this is, again, tracking. Everyone that's walking through that space is being tracked and presumably identified. Next slide. I mean, Orwell would have a field day these days because of what's possible. Now, at one point I was wandering the South Hall, and I came across this. I saw this digital projection sign, and then I saw this kind of thing that looked like a bunch of kids made it up. And it says 8K 3D theater. So I thought, I got to go see what this is. And there's a little map on the bottom that shows you how to get there. How could that not be fun? And next slide, I got there, and a bunch of guys from Astro were standing around with these really cool jackets that say 8K. They get the, if there were an award being given for, the best costume design, they would get it at NAB. They've even got, see the little buttons and the little belts in the back? So, next slide. So, what was being shown? Well, these are strippers on poles. This is 8K, and it is 3D. Now, they made you sign a little form saying that you weren't going to be upset by that. They don't want the blowback from anybody. And what really was going on is that Astro, I think they're in Tokyo, but they're located above the strip bar. And one day they wanted to shoot a test. So they went downstairs and asked permission, can we just film these women? Now, they're not naked. They've got like bikini things on. But they're doing pole dancing, very suggestive. And so I sat and watched that, and I tried to get a demo of that for this meeting, and we almost had it worked out. We may try to do it later this year with digital projection. It's a collaboration with Astro and digital projection. Basically, they're using 4K digital micro mirror device light engines, just like most of the 4K projectors do these days. And imagine that they're shaking that so that at a pitch of about a half a pixel, and they're at probably 120 hertz, so that's how they get the 8K on the screen. They flash one 4K image, they move a half a pixel, they flash another, they move back, they flash another, they move back, they flash another. They do the further trick of dividing that frequency in half, one set of images to each eye, which is how they get the 3D. And you put on a pair of active glasses, and the active glasses are so lightweight, I could have sworn that they were polarized, but they weren't. They were active glasses. That's how far that technology has come. And I'm here to tell you, the first thing they showed us was not quite a boy band, but it was something comparable to that. It was like a K-pop band in Japan, or Japanese version of that. And it was stunning. I mean, it was stunning. They've got enough brightness out of this projector. It's the best 3D I've ever seen. And so maybe we'll try to bring that here and demonstrate it for you. If you see it on the meeting notice, you've got to show up. It's amazing. Next slide. ATS 3.0, I don't have much to say about, except that this was part of an ATSC 3.0 demo, again, relying upon Maserati. By the way, the back of the car was blue. I don't know why. That's the same car. Next slide. What I'm getting at is this. This is a demo of ATSC 3.0, its mobility. Do we really want the TV weather person explaining the AccuWeather forecast while we're driving? I mean, if you thought texting was bad, look at this. I'm serious. I'm not really sure if that's a good idea. I don't know if this was a great way to demonstrate. Anyway. There you go. You don't even need a driver. Just let the car go by itself. Next slide. I did like the rubber duckies, though. I grabbed a few. I have no idea. Does anyone know what that means, why they did that? Next slide. So the show wasn't a disaster, although FEMA was there just in case. Lastly, next slide. In memoriam, while at NAB, we received the news, next slide, that Jean-Pierre Boviala passed away. He was the founder of Aton. He was the inventor of the Aton camera. He was a dear friend of mine. I worked with him many years ago. We worked together to introduce Super 16 into the US. I modified the optical printers and the rollers and printing machines and all of that at DuArt Laboratories. We bought a camera from him. We put money down on his first 35 camera. We put in the daisy wheel device that printed onto full coat. We installed he had an LED system for printing on the edge of film on negative as it went through the camera, kind of dot matrix system that printed eye-readable information as well as barcode, or matrix rather. And he was an amazing guy. He was one of the few true geniuses I've known in the industry, on top of which he was colorful. A lot of people knew him, but several of us on the show floor were just walking around kind of stunned for a day. So I just wanted to pay tribute to him. SMPTE awarded Jean-Pierre several awards. They awarded him the John Grierson International Gold Medal Award in 1982 for outstanding technical achievement in the design of handheld cameras, the associated electronic circuitry and time code synchronization systems. He held many of the patents on time code synchronization for motion picture cameras. I think, if memory serves, I may have suggested him for that award. I remember being approached for ideas about who could be nominated for that, and I put forth his name, so I may be responsible for that. In 2002, the Society awarded him the Eastman Kodak Gold Medal Award for the development of the A Minima Super 16 camera, and that's that little guy that's over there. So, blue skies, next slide. Blue skies until next year. Thank you.
I just have to say that going last is hard, but I think it was a really great progression that we had to have David go last, and thank you, David. And I need to ask Eric for a housekeeping question. Right now it's 8:30 on my analog watch. How are we doing for time? 15 minutes Q&A. Okay, 15 minutes Q&A. Can we just get a quick setup and get the panelists back up? Unfortunately, it will be fast. And I think Eric's going to mic you up and get some chairs up. Chairs are here. You have to go over here, gentlemen. I'll bring the chairs. Okay. Oh, the chairs are coming out to you. So. And you're getting really fancy chairs, you know. So. Oh, right here, anywhere, just.
Mark?
So.
Actually, I'm going to steal yours.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
David, I'm just going to let you moderate. You got 15 minutes.
Okay. I'm told we have 15 minutes, and I'm told that I'm the moderator. So let's start with questions from people. I mean, that was a lot of information we dumped on you. There's a person in the back.
I'm sorry, the company for which product? Oh, that was Bob's.
That was Joseph Electronics out of Chicago. Yeah.
I saw was volumetric capture.
Come on, Jeff.
I saw volumetric capture that was being used in lieu of chromatic or luminance keying. And I was wondering if anybody saw that. And it was being used to do compositing in real time. I was wondering if anyone saw that.
I've seen it in the past. I didn't see it this year.
Yeah, it's been around for quite some time.
Yes, over there.
Could you all just discuss a little bit about NDI and where you think it's really going into the market? We're sorry.
Do you want me to start?
He'd like you to repeat the question about NDI and where it's going in the
Yeah,
market.
NDI. So yeah, New Tech started this. You know, last year at NAB, I think there was I only saw like 6 companies or something like that in you know, for their little interop area, and there was more this year, but it's definitely grown. I mean, my whole thing is it's not a SMPTE standard. The thing that bothers me is I've asked questions about, is it compressed? Is it, you know, they said yes, and it's like what the rate is, they won't tell me. You know, I mean, it just seems like what they're doing seems to be very secret. I don't know. I do know. I'm trying to think how I can say it. When one of the companies bought the other company, someone made the comment that I heard that Thomas Edwards called immediately and said, "We need to make it a standard." So anyway, yeah, but it seems. It's interesting. But I did definitely see a lot more companies supporting that IP interface. So at the show, definitely did that. So.
Well, there was a new deal where they did a multi-cast thing in it or something. Is there information on that?
No, I didn't see that, sorry.
So, all of us remember 2000 when there was the Sands Expo Center and they were advertising 120,000 attendees and all this .com BS. And I look at the list of exhibitors and some pretty cool stuff. I don't know how much money some of these companies are going to generate, and I wanted to hear speculation on how many of these companies you expect to be there next year.
Let me start first on that, because that's of interest to me, too. A lot of the people in the motion picture realm have been moving over to Cinegear in Los Angeles that takes place in May, and they're beginning to write off NAB. In fact, they're holding their product introductions to Cinegear. But someone that Mark and I know who imports tripods told us something very interesting. He said that Cinegear's, and these are first-rate tripods, he said Cinegear's of no use for him because it's just a showcase. He says he actually does business at NAB. He makes sales. So he has to make a choice between the two because he doesn't feel he can go to both. So he's going to NAB for the business. And I thought that was an interesting insight.
Yeah, I know one company out in California that chose to get a suite at the LVH, what is it called, the Westgate now. I didn't make it over there. I didn't have time to go all the way over to that hotel to try to find this suite to see their products. But one vendor said to me once, I said, "Are you going to be at NAB this year?" It was a small company. And he looked at me and he said, "Bob, I can't afford not to be at NAB." So that was interesting, too.
Do you think, piggybacking on Sean's question a bit, do you think the NAB convention is in trouble? I'm getting a sense that companies are making business decisions that it is so expensive, and although maybe some business is done, a lot of it is so intangible to really measure the true result value you get. I'm thinking that the NAB convention may need to be
David
reinvented.
made a distinction between three categories, the third of which was gear. And you need to see gear. You need to see what a lens does. You need to see cameras. You need to see displays. Things that are software you can play with in your office. There's really no purpose in going other than seeing people networking, something like that. Every year I'm astonished that people go out to Las Vegas to look at a box that has software in it. Last year I showed one of my slides was an email message from a vendor, and he said, "Sorry, we didn't meet up at NAB, but it doesn't matter because it's all software anyway."
There was a slide I had, I went past it quickly, and I don't think I explained it adequately, but it was about the change in the schedule next year. And next year, they're chopping a day off. The Thursday is no longer.
Yeah, but they're starting on Sunday.
Well, but NAB is going almost full bore on Sunday anyway, not the show, on the floor. But Sunday is it's press conferences, meetings, seminars, keynotes, exactly. You know, the Future of Cinema conference and a bunch of other conferences. So it's all going to be mashed up and more intense now, I think. Also, Thursday traditionally has been when the people who are there as equipment manufacturers, that's when they get to wander around the show because they have to man the booth. That's when they figure there aren't as many people there, and that's their day when they walk around and talk to each other. And that sense of community is one of the most valuable aspects of a trade show like NAB. There are people that I see every year there that I don't see anywhere else during the year, and we feel like we know each other. But that's where, as a tribe, we all come together. So there's a real value in that. I could see moving to a different city someday.
One other thing I'll jump on that is NAB, there was we find it face-to-face, it really makes a difference. So when you're having a problem with a vendor, you walk in the booth and you're like, hey, this still doesn't work, from 6 months ago, right? And they grab the VP of engineering and all these people and they might take you back to a back room. But, by the end of the meeting, we find out that, it's going to be fixed immediately. And so we have found that that's a real advantage, getting face-to-face with these people and discussing the problems we're having.
The other thing I appreciate, this year I mentioned at the outset that I had targeted things that I wanted to talk about and ask about. I bought a microphone, I bought a bunch of stuff. So I went around and talked to people, and what's really great is you talk to the people that really know stuff. I talked to the head of Mogami, which makes wire, and we had a long conversation about the various types of wire. In this case, I was going to make up some XLR cables for audio. But there are distinctions, and there are differences, and they make much more expensive versions of wire and cable and much cheaper versions, and what are the differences? And why is Mogami different or better than any other company? And so here's the president of the company that's spending 45 minutes with me discussing this minutia. Where would I ever get that? And it caused me to go home after NAB, and I researched a lot of that stuff on my own. That's amazing. I actually enjoyed that. So that's what NAB can bring or offer.
I have a comment to add to that. I think it's actually more important than it's ever been. And I come at it, this was my 20th. I've been an end user, an exhibitor, and an integrator. Yeah, it's changed, it's evolved. But now you have all these exhibitors have meeting booths where you have some really high-level meetings where maybe a PO's not cut, but a deal is made. And a lot of the smaller guys, like you said, can't afford to be there. They have to be there. They are getting suites in the Renaissance, LVH, and they're showing up, but you got to look harder for them. So I don't see it going away, and I see it actually being more important of a show than it's ever been.
The international aspect also is something that I find of great value. You may have noticed some of the people that I showed on the screen were Asian, and that's because some of the most innovative lighting design is taking place in Asia, and that's why this stupid tariff situation that's kind of run out of control, forgive me, but if I'm showing my cards here, but I don't understand it. And NAB has become kind of an international marketplace. That's why I showed the picture of the people from Tehran. That's extraordinary. Don't we want that? Isn't that a good thing? Do we want fewer companies from China that are innovative coming to NAB? So anyway, I hope NAB resumes or can sustain that going forward. With any luck, our politics will change, and maybe we can get back to that. Don't forget, people have problems getting into this country. Problems getting into this country. Businessmen do.
Now, David, I don't want to, we have to wrap it up a little bit. Any closing comments?
I think.
When I started going to NAB, if I went to a lens manufacturer, they gave me a set of MTF curves. It was just standard practice. The lenses are much better today, but it's all magic. It's a good lens because we say it's a good lens, or an 8K lens, as David was saying. What's an 8K lens? There is no such thing. There's no such thing as a 4K lens or an HD lens. A piece of Coca-Cola bottle will pass frequencies out to 4K or 8K or 16K.
Well, I guess that's as good a place as any to end. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to WABC-TV.